Welcome back, guys. In the previous endgame video, we learned about the key defensive ideas in the Philidor position. In this video, I will attempt to explain the defensive ideas when the stronger side denies the defensive side access to the 6th rank. So in this position, it's white to move, and he plays rook to h6, stopping black from going rook g6 and executing the Philidor position. So black plays rook to g1, this is the best move. Rook h7 check, king to e8. Now king to e6 will be met with rook g6 check. And black holds this position easily using the Philidor technique. So a more challenging try is to go king d6. But here rook to e1 from black, and this is the first key defensive idea. So the defender puts his rook behind the enemy pawn, and this sort of ties down white's king to the defense of it. So e6 runs into rook d1 check, and white can't escape the flurry of checks as seen in the Philidor position. So a more challenging try is to go king to e6. This threatens mate with rook to h8 check. So now king to f8, this is the second key defensive idea. It is important to step in the direction of the short side of the pawn, so a quick explanation on long and short side of the pawn. In this position, the long side of the pawn is going to be the left side of the pawn, which is comprised of 4 squares, and the short side is the right side of the pawn, which only has 3 squares. So one needs to remember to step to the short side of the pawn. And after this demonstration, I'll show you a quick example of what could go wrong if one steps to the long side of the pawn. So here rook h8 check, king g7, rook to a8, rook e2, white maintains the attack on the pawn, king to d6, and now king to f7. This is the third key defensive idea to keep in mind. So the moment white steps his king aside to push his pawn, you have to bring the king back to control the pawn's advance. In this case is the e6 square, and the king in combination with the rook will be able to stop this advance. Rook a7 check, king to e8, king to e6. So once again threatening mate, and once again black shows good technique, stepping to the short side of the pawn. Rook a8 check, king g7, rook e8. Now white goes for a different approach. So if rook to e1, white's idea is to play king d7 because the rook is now defending the pawn, and his next move will be e6. So here king f7 would be a mistake because white pushes e6, and the pawn will eventually queen. So going back to king d7, here rook to a1 is the only way to draw the game because on e6 check, fortunately for black, white can't escape the checks on the long side of the pawn. And here king f6, the king approaches the pawn on e6, and black holds this position quite easily. But for the sake of good technique, let's return to our main position. So here rook to a2 is the fourth key defensive idea. Black brings his rook over to the long side of the pawn, and he is preparing to give checks to the enemy king. So here white might try to move rook to d8. This prepares to intercept the check with rook d6. But here rook to e2, and white can't improve his position. Black now maintains the attack on the pawn. I'll play through this position for a bit so that you can see how black utilizes the defensive ideas that we have already discussed. So king to f5, king f7, taking control of the e6 square, rook d7 check, king to e8, rook h7, rook to e1, maintaining the attack on the pawn, king e6, threatening mate, so king f8 stepping to the short side of the pawn, rook h8 check, king g7, rook to a8, rook to e2, rook to e8. White is now defending his pawn and is preparing to step the king out of the way, so Rook to a2, preparing to give checks on the long side of the pawn. Rook d8, preparing to intercept the checks. And now rook e2. So now let's see what happens if the defensive side avoids mate by stepping to the long side of the pawn. In some cases, this could be decisive. So in this position, Black has just played his king over to e8 to avoid mate. But after rook a8 check, king d7, rook f8, rook to a1, Black would love to give some checks on the long side of the board, but unfortunately after king g7, his own king is in the way. So we can see the consequences of stepping to the long side of the pawn. So I hope you found this tutorial helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.